What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be concluding our free-to-play challenge here in MTG Arena. I began this challenge at the beginning of July before Baldur's Gate released in MTG Arena with the end goal of building a competitive deck. And definitely one of those things, looking back on it, we did fairly a good job, I would say, overall, just because in the process of the 4 weeks or so that we've done this, we went ahead in the first half, built our competitive deck. We then went ahead and got to a platinum rank, and we also did that also in limited, which is definitely very good, I think, overall as a whole. Just for our initial being a free-to-play player and not using any sort of real money to actually get ourselves into the competitive scene immediately that you could possibly do if you were to spend money. So I think overall this experience has been pretty good. The one thing I will note, I would say, when it comes to the free-to-play experience is the fact that, through this challenge, we were able to, accomplish a lot of good things. On day one, we were here at this screen. We did, start off brand new account. We went ahead and we grinded out our experience here with the tutorial that you get when you first start out the game playing the basic mono white deck. We afterwards then completed the color challenge, unlocking all 5 of the original starter decks that you get when you first start out here in MTG Arena when you first start playing. Definitely the first day was probably the longest of all of this, as that we were having to grind a lot in order to get ourselves to the point to really start farming out what we need to do. Based off of the initial farming that we did earn a decent amount of currency. As you can kind of see here, we had 2,800 gold immediately right off the bat after completing the color challenge. We also had 160 gems. We did have some wild cards, and then we also got jump-in tokens, which was definitely one of those things that helped us out immediately at the beginning. We then went ahead and we used all the free-to-play, or all the codes that were available to us to get some free packs in MTG Arena. I think initially, right off the bat, before even playing any games outside of the color challenge, I think there was something of the round of 44 or 45 packs in total, which went all the way back to Throne of Eldraine, as this was definitely a good boost to our overall collection when we actually started to open up these packs, as each pack we opened up had a chance of containing wild cards, and then on top of that, it allowed us to get progression in our overall wild card wheels that you see here at the top, which then allowed us to then get a guaranteed wild card, uncommon, and rare throughout this whole process, which definitely helped us out overall, and definitely something that helped us on day one. As you can kind of see here, this is all on day one. I don't think in this part of the process, as I am looking back at the footage of my day one filming, this was day one. We haven't done anything. We haven't used a jump-in token. I don't think we've gotten our daily wins out of the way just yet, or started the jump-in event. But then after we got these packs, we then went ahead and we moved into jump-in, which is another thing that I do think MTG does an okay job at explaining to you by giving you these tokens that you get that give you free access to 5 jump-in event games, which was definitely a good thing, as it gives you free entry into something which helps build your overall collection. And normally something that would cost you 1,000 gold, giving you 5 of them for free is essentially saving you 5,000 gold. As a whole is definitely very good. The other thing too is we did this pre-Baldur's Gate, so we didn't have any really the big alchemy stuff in the format, which was definitely very helpful. And I do think that's kind of the weird part where Jump-In is currently. It does have Baldur's Gate stuff in it. It does have alchemy cards in it, and it doesn't make that kind of like play that you would want to have unless you're really pushing alchemy very beneficial to a new player who's just trying to get into the game. Because the problem with, I think, Baldur's Gate, and I think a lot of people outside of it being alchemy, I think the one thing is that a lot of the cards are very, very wordy compared to typical Magic cards, and I think that's definitely one of those things you don't want to have to give players cards that literally have paragraphs of wording on them, and I think that's very overwhelming. I hope in the future maybe they see what the problems were with Baldur's Gate with the cards being wordy. Maybe they'll dial that back a little bit if they were to introduce more alchemy cards to the game, just because I do feel like maybe you add that extra layer but you don't really go above the extra layer of a typical Magic card. But yet again, looking at the challenge, we are on day one. We do have all these packs. We do participate in we do get our first jump-in deck, which was Spirit Mechs. I believe I used for a couple of days. It was an okay deck, though it wasn't the quickest deck. It wasn't an aggro deck. It was more of a mid-range deck that we want to set up a lot of our spirits, as well as a lot of our vehicles, which was really the way we finished off our opponent. And the one thing is that we did see early on that eventually I re-rolled our jump in event was that, the problem with this deck is that blue and white really don't have a lot of ways to spot removal, just ways to kind of delay the process of what your opponent's doing or bounce what your opponent's doing back to their hand. But regardless, that's kind of one of those things that you kind of learn as you play these kind of beginning decks, and this is kind of what we did use. Not just this deck, but the other multiple jump-in decks that we used over the course of the beginning of the challenge to kind of build up our initial currency that we built up before building our deck. The other thing, too, is I will note is that a lot of these games initially early on took up a lot of time, right? Because I'm using very limited decks. They're not as powerful as your typical jump-in deck or your typical constructed deck, as they are limited in the sense of how many copies of cards you contain. They do have some synergies, but they don't have a ton of synergies. It's kind of more in line with like a draft deck, but maybe a little bit weaker, just because in a draft you may have multiple copies of certain cards. You have cards all around really one set, whereas this was kind of spared space between two different sets or multiple sets, unless you got lucky and were able to get two packets from the same set. But yet again, it's definitely a fun kind of challenge because it is a lot of experience a lot of things that, at a very limited capacity. Your opponents play a limited style deck. They're not going to have a really powerful deck. But this just allowed us to kind of pick up, kind of get started with our overall deck building and collection as a whole, and not having to really dive into the play queue or the rank queue and having to play people who have decks that are really decked out, having multiple copies of various things when we're very limited and very low on resources to really build a deck that gets there. So then on day 13 of the challenge, we get into the part where I was starting to decide what deck I wanted to build. So we went about 2 weeks into the challenge. We farmed up a lot of currency as a whole. I don't remember how much currency we had on day 13, but we had a good amount. So, yet again, we had a good amount of currency. We were looking through the various decks that we could build with our currency, and at this time, I did have more than enough rares to build all the decks you see here on my screen that have the Lotus, the Black Lotus, I should say, that is the bronzish mythic color that I could go ahead and just craft straight up and outright. This is where I kind of start making that decision at this point, 2 weeks into July, with my currency, like what I could go ahead and build. These are all fairly competitive decks in all various styles of kind of decks. I would say there's a couple aggro decks, there's a couple more of the tempo decks, and then there's Rakdos Sacrifice, which is more of that mid-range deck. And in this process, deciding here, I went with kind of at the time the trendy deck, I would say, because Boros Aggro at the time, or Boros Burn, was kind of the top deck in the meta as a whole. So during our free-to-play challenge, we were able to go ahead and build, two decently good decks, one being the Boros Aggro deck that we went ahead and crafted. This was our first deck. Is it the most optimized version? Probably of Boros Aggro that's out there. Not really. I would say the one thing we really didn't invest in that you may see in other Boros Aggro decks is really the mana base. We really kind of didn't really super invest heavily, as there are a lot of cards that are in probably the more optimized version that has more cards that are going to rotate out of standard in the near future. And I just didn't really feel like it was necessary to really include them. And this deck still performs fairly well. I even think at the recording of this video, we're still over a 60% win rate with the deck as a whole. It was kind of one of the things that helped us get to platinum in general, just because this deck wins more often than it does lose. The other deck that we went ahead and built that, we did do here at the tail end of the challenge was that we went ahead and we built Rakdos Anvil. Is this the most optimized version of Rakdos Anvil? Like the prior deck, not really. The one thing being the land base is a little bit more on the budget side, as we do have, not as many creature lands. We also have a couple tap lands in here, not as many pathways. And we didn't get a complete set of Haunted Ridge, which is definitely a land that would help the deck as a whole, just to kind of give us more lands that can produce one or both colors. But other than that, we still have 2 Meathook Massacres, 2 Ob Nixiluses, and the rest of the deck, is kind of like a decent base to really go with when it comes to a Rakdos Anvil deck. Rakdos Anvil, is one of those decks that is, I think, on that cusp of, it's not maybe the best deck currently in the format, as the format has shifted a little bit away from it, and it's there are a lot of things that kind of go big, that kind of go over the top of Rakdos Anvil. You get those like those Jund decks that have like the Titan of Industry and stuff like that. That's just a big creature, gets rid of artifacts, and it also has trample. So it's definitely a good deck that's kind of counters this deck. But this deck can hold its own against more of the other mid-range decks that don't really put a lot of pressure with creatures with trample and really have any way to destroy artifacts at a whole. And it does have Meathook Massacre as a kind of our way to clean up the board if we do get in a part of get overwhelmed by what our opponent's doing. And like I said, it's definitely cool to see that I was able to pull together two decently good decks with limited budget. We did build a Historic Pauper deck when it was Historic Pauper for the weekly Magic, which is definitely, something just to kind of have. It's not something that you need to do as a free-to-play player. But I figured I'd try my bat at doing one of the midweek Magics to kind of earn some additional rares from the 2 initial wins, and then getting a random cosmetic from that. And then we also still have Dimir Ninjas, which is, I think, another deck I was actually looking to possibly build in originally when I started this challenge, just because this is kind of the time period when I did not play a lot of MTG Arena when Kamigawa released. So I really didn't get to play with the ninjutsu ability. But even with this deck is still decent, that it can hold its own even in budget form, just because, even though we don't have full sets of like Bite and Palm Ninja, we don't have 2 copies of Satoru Uziawa or Nashi. This deck is still really good. It's definitely a good tempo deck. It does play a lot of good cards that I do think help create that tempo with ways to disrupt what your opponent's doing by bouncing their creatures, or even just countering cards in general, and then kind of playing that game that we're not trying to do too much. We're just trying to get in for that free points of damage, and then swap out a creature for a creature that does some additional effect. But yet again, another fun deck that I do think that could see some improvement when rotation does happen. And if this was a different time period during this whole standard meta as a whole, like if I made this series back maybe when Kamigawa first released, I may have leaned into Dimir Ninjas at that time instead of doing maybe one of the other decks. I don't think Boros Aggro was really a thing then, but still, maybe Rakdos Anvil also. Those have probably been the 2 decks I may have looked at, just because, other than aggro being like hit face kind of thing, these other 2 decks have a little bit more things to do outside of just playing cards and trying to hit your opponent as hard as possible, as quickly as possible. There's a little bit more, there's some other lines you can play with these decks that kind of make them a little bit more fun to me as a player. So that brings us to today as we get into MTG Arena, and the reason why I figure that this is a good place to call it is that we kind of got to that point where we are in a repetition of doing 2 things essentially to build up our currency. We've accomplished the main goal of our challenge, which was to build the deck. And I do think it's one of those things that, as much as, I enjoyed the challenge, I don't think every day I can bring something new to make it exciting to do something I haven't done before, right? Like when we first built our deck, it was cool to play our deck, go up the initial day, go up the ranks in the standard ladder. Then after that, it was, playing our first standard event, which was definitely very awesome. And I do think I sprinkled in one more Crimson Vow draft as well, which is definitely, those were things that we wanted to do. And I feel like I did prove the fact that, you can play this game free to play. You don't need to spend money to actually, enjoy the game. You can build something competitive in a, decent amount of time, as long as you kind of put a little bit of focus and kind of, really think about your overall decisions when it comes to playing MTG Arena as a whole. It does require a little bit of luck, just with your daily quests, your progress you make on your weekly and daily wins. There is a little bit of luck when it comes to drafting, depending on what you open. It's all RNG based in that regard. But just overall, this has definitely been one of those things that I think was fun. I hope it was fun for you guys to watch. I know this whole thing went through a few iterations on, how I kind of presented what I was doing on a daily basis. I think at first it was just showing you the wins, and then I eventually evolved into showing you just the last turn, and then after that it was actually showing you, talking through the moves and doing things like that. I showed you, my thought process through like some of my drafts. But just overall, there's a lot that I do think I learned from this whole process. I hope I taught you guys something, especially if you're newer players, about the whole process when it comes to starting out in the game. I hope these videos were helpful. They'll still be in the playlist here on the channel, so if you want to check them out afterwards and maybe watch maybe certain days that you may have not caught, because, yet again, there's possibility that this is the first time you're seeing my whole challenge, so you can go all the way back and watch day 1 and kind of understand where I started from. But yet again, without, you guys helping me, giving me some feedback, kind of, telling me what you guys wanted to see, it definitely helped overall improve, I think, the videos as a whole. And also, I do think this is one of those things that, a lot of exciting stuff happened here on the channel. At the beginning of the challenge, we were a little bit shy of 5K, and I think now at this time of the challenge, depending on when you see this, we're already over 5K. I think we're just about to break 5.1K, which is definitely awesome. And yet again, I can't thank you guys any more than, every time I reply back to your comments, I hit like on one of your comments. I just definitely appreciate everyone who watched and commented and left feedbacks or left a like. Definitely helped out. This is definitely something I want to do in the future again. Maybe pick a time where there's a little bit of a lull in the format. Maybe in the middle of standard instead of towards the tail end of a standard. before rotation, just because that means we have a little bit more access to various cards that we normally wouldn't have, went ahead and invested into because we lose them to rotation. But overall, definitely one of those things that I'm excited to dive back into some more decks and stuff that I can maybe play for the last time before they rotate out of standard on my main account. I haven't even touched my main account this whole month. It's all been on this free-to-play account, so my main account probably has 3 daily quests at the bottom that they're all either for 500 gold or something like that. I have 0 progress in the Mastery Pass. Maybe I'll dive into a Baldur's Gate draft just because I haven't really done it at all, and I kind of wanted to see what it's like to play limited in Baldur's Gate, so I'll probably try that on the main account. Just overall, I'm excited for Dominaria, just to kind of give a little shake up to standard. It doesn't look like we're gonna get a standard 2023 queue. But like I said, maybe I'll post some stuff about some ideas for more decks before rotation that could be a good idea to swing. I'm hoping to dive a little bit more into the new starter decks and kind of give a little bit of my breakdown of each one. Maybe I'll individually do reviews on them just because I do think I don't want to make a video super long and then you guys only watch part of it, just because, it's definitely tough to watch a big video. I know this video is already, kind of on the long side, but I figured I'd give like more of a clarification just on this whole challenge as a whole in this video. So that's kind of why this one's a little bit longer. But if you like this video, guys, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you guys have any more feedback for me, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback maybe on the series as a whole as well. Just in case, I would like to hear what you guys thought of the process as well. Maybe what could be changed, what we can do differently in the future. If you're new here, you want to know I post new videos on the channel like this one, hit that subscribe button, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.